Jimmy Garoppolo is staying put in San Francisco. What does that mean for Trey Lance? I'm Joe Dolan, and this is the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup for Tuesday, August 30th, 2022.
It's time for the FantasyPoints.com Daily Lineup. Staying on top of the latest news and updates around the NFL. Rise and shine, folks. We're taking the field. Here's your host, FantasyPoints.com's Joe Dolan.
Now, before we get into our scheduled lineup for the day, we have some breaking news. Ben Kukanis behind the glass, by the way. He loves that we have this so he can mock up a graphic. The Ravens love the Drake. Per ESPN's Josina Anderson, the Baltimore Ravens, I don't think she's with ESPN anymore, but that doesn't matter. The Baltimore Ravens are expected to sign a veteran running back, and it is Kenyon Drake, pending a physical, on Tuesday. Now, Drake was recently released by the Raiders. Baltimore needs some veteran running back help because Gus Edwards will miss at least the first 4 games of the 2022 season, while the status of J.K. Dobbins, who also suffered a terrible knee injury last summer, is up in the air. Dobbins has only returned to drills at this point and is almost certainly not going to be 100% at the beginning of the season. Now, in his lone season with the Raiders, Drake played in 12 games, missing the final 5 with a broken ankle. He managed 63 carries for 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's about 4 yards per carry, and a strong 30 catches for 291 receiving yards and a touchdown receiving on 40 targets in those 12 games before getting hurt. Now, when Drake went down, he was the RB36 in total scoring and the RB48 in fantasy points per game, and that production was largely driven by spike weeks. While Drake had 3 games as a top 12 PPR running back, all in a row, by the way, from week 6 through 9, he didn't finish in the top 24 at the running back position in any of his other 9 games. But at a minimum, given the spike weeks the last few years that we've seen from Drake in his time with the Raiders and the Cardinals, we know he can be a useful fantasy asset when given the opportunity. Brett Whitefield from our Fantasy Points data and research team considers Drake an outstanding scheme fit in Baltimore. Drake will obviously take a little bit of time to marinate, but if Dobbins isn't ready for the opener against the Jets, veteran Mike Davis will probably get the majority of the work. However, Drake should certainly be on the radar for 0 RB drafters. Now, to our regularly scheduled daily lineup program. And starting at quarterback today, it was the biggest news of Monday. It's Trey Lance. But for how long? That's because veteran quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers have agreed to a restructured 1-year deal to keep the quarterback with the team through the upcoming season, Adam Schefter of ESPN reports. Now, there are a lot of layers to this onion. First of all, the most simple explanation could well be that the 49ers had no real trade interest in Jimmy G, given his whopper of a contract. And they didn't want to cut him and lose him for nothing, and especially to a division rival like Seattle, for instance. Now, a restructured deal makes it easier to trade him this year before the deadline, though Garoppolo has some power in that regard. This is how negotiations work, folks, because they have a no-trade provision put in the contract. So Jimmy G doesn't have to go somewhere Jimmy D doesn't want to go. Now, at minimum, San Fran could potentially recoup a comp pick if Garoppolo walks next offseason. That was mostly the take of Good Morning Football's Peter Schrager, who tweeted that Garoppolo is a rare dude who would accept such a situation, and that quarterback injuries elsewhere in the league could mean that the price for Jimmy G goes up a ton over the next 6 to 10 weeks. That was from Peter Schrager. The more conspiracy-minded of us, though, could very well consider this a back pocket plan in case Trey Lance, who had a shaky camp in preseason, isn't ready to play for a team with Super Bowl aspirations. Until Garoppolo is no longer on this roster, those concerns will remain. Now, take these tweets from the ever-plugged-in Chris Mortensen of ESPN, for instance. Garoppolo would have interest if released, but his best chance for success at this stage is right where he's at. The only thing that matters, as 3 sources close to the 49ers said this weekend, is to give the team the best chance to win. Jimmy G insurance makes sense. If Trey Lance isn't ready, Chris Mortensen continues, The 49ers can't worry about saving face if he doesn't progress early in season. You do the right thing for a team that fell just short of a Super Bowl. If Lance does emerge, then Jimmy G has secured his freedom for 2023. Yes, Lance will start the season and should start this season. It's likely we've seen Garoppolo's ceiling, and Lance was the third pick in the NFL draft. The Niners have to see if his massive talent can take them to the next level. But Garoppolo was one throw away from being a Super Bowl champion and was one dropped interception away, not his fault, by the way, of course, from starting a second Super Bowl. This is not some scrub, regardless of how people might talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, Lance, from a fantasy perspective, can still be drafted as a quarterback one, given his massive upside and how easy it is to replace quarterbacks on the waiver wire in fantasy if you swing and miss. But the more risk-averse may be avoiding him now. Coincidentally, though, you might feel better about drafting dudes like Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk with the knowledge that if Lance is really struggling and not getting those guys the ball, the Niners can pull the plug and go to Jimmy G. As Mort insinuated, this team will not voluntarily blow a Super Bowl window. Starting at running back today and in week 1 is the Steelers' Najee Harris. But are we worried? Now, the second-year back rushed 4 times for 10 yards and caught all 3 of his targets for 11 yards in Sunday's preseason win over the Lions. And it's good news that Harris, who had been dealing with a foot injury throughout training camp, played. But the bigger news was what we found out after the game. Harris said he was dealing with a Lisfranc sprain over the last few weeks, and that, not what Coach Mike Tomlin said, is what kept him out of action. Here's what our Dr. Edwin Porras wrote. This is significant for starters because it completely contradicts Mike Tomlin's previous statement that Najee Harris's foot was stepped on. That's what apparently held him out. Oh, he got stepped on in practice. Well, maybe somebody really stepped on him. Secondly, Harris has a history of foot issues dating back to 2018, Edwin continues. Although the literature states the injury can be treated without surgery successfully, there is some concern that this is an old injury rearing its head. Still, Dr. Porras called it merely a mild to moderate concern. Obviously, Harris was good enough to play in the preseason finale, so he'll be good to go for the regular season. The Steelers are smart and wouldn't have played him if he wasn't 100%. But with concerns about the Steelers' offensive line and the offense in general, it does raise a little bit of, let's just say, uncertainty in the gut region when you're drafting Najee Harris in the first round. Now, we're drafting Najee in round 1 because of his outrageous volume. An injury would obviously sap that. Some might choose to pivot to the wide receivers or another back, like maybe DeAndre Swift or Joe Mixon, in the area where Najee is currently getting drafted. At our other starting running back spot, we have the Vikings backup. How does that work? The Federalist, Alexander Madison, has been the subject of trade discussions with at least 12 teams, according to Chris Thomason of the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Now, that seems like a lot of teams, and also seems like the Vikings trying to drive up interest in Madison. But Madison is a good player who could help a good bit of NFL teams. From a fantasy perspective, that part is obvious. In 6 career games without Dalvin Cook, Madison averages a whopping 20.4 PPR fantasy points per game. For comparison, only Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and Austin Eckler averaged more this past season at the running back position. The issue with getting a deal done is Madison is headed into a contract year and likely wants to be paid. Meanwhile, the Vikings likely want at least a 5th-round pick, given they would probably get a comp pick if Madison moves on after the season. Of course, the Vikings would have to lose more free agents than they signed to get that, so it's not exact science. And the issue for fantasy is finding a spot where Madison would be a bell cow. We know he can do it for a couple of weeks if need be, but most logical landing spots, like Philly, for example, would almost certainly use him as an early down bruiser as part of a committee. Nonetheless, I would expect to see Madison move up draft boards on the off chance he is traded. And if he does move somewhere, it will certainly be a place where he has a more immediate path to playing time than in Minnesota. If the Vikings do move Madison, 5th-round rookie Ty Chandler could be the top backup to Dalvin Cook. So keep an eye on him, dynasty players. Though 4th-round speedster Kenny Nwangwu is also interesting. At our first wide receiver spot, we have one of the most popular breakout candidates of the year. The Bills' Gabriel Davis was someone who stood out to NBC's Peter King on his annual training camp tour this year, King wrote in his Football Morning in America column on Monday. Now, King actually stuck this tidbit into a section of his column called Fantasyland, in which he outlined 20 different fantasy tips he picked up from his tour. Now, Peter King did put out a humorous and important disclaimer at the top of the section, and I thought this was necessary to read. Quote, "I stink at fantasy football, don't play it, and am throwing these tidbits out there because they might be able to help you." Well, and damn it, Peter, you're helping us confirm our priors, so we will listen to you. Here's what Peter King wrote about Davis. Quote, "If you want to glom onto the explosive Bills," glom, I like that word, "think of wide receiver Gabriel Davis fairly early. What round? I don't know. That's what I'm here to help, Peter. But when I was in Bills camp, I was told with certainty that his 4-touchdown performance in the playoffs loss at Kansas City was the start of something big, not a fluke. He's a worker, and Josh Allen sees him as a great compliment, not a distant number 2 to Stephon Diggs." Now, normally when we hear the word compliment for a wide receiver or running back, you think of a part-time player. But this is not what King is asserting here. He's saying that Josh Allen views Davis as a 1B to Diggs' 1A, like a Mike Williams to Diggs' Keenan Allen. Now, if you've read Fantasy Points this offseason, you know where we stand on Davis. We've made it evidently clear. Now, we're in early and often, and in most drafts, that's meant the 4th round. However, Davis's ADP is buried on many sites. We have him ranked 25 spots above his ADP, or what Yahoo calls X rank, and 14 spots above ADP on ESPN, among others. That's always important to note when heading into a draft. At our second wide receiver spot, we now head to Carolina. The Panthers acquired third-year wideout Laviska Shenault from the Jaguars on Monday, Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reports. Carolina traded a 2023 7th-round pick and a 2024 6th-round pick for the Reclamation Project. Let's not point out that their last Reclamation Project was Sam Darnold. And now they have another one in Baker Mayfield. And now another one in Laviska Shenault. Now it's a fresh start for Shenault, who has been one of the worst receivers in the NFL in his 2 seasons with the Jags. Though I will admit to being surprised by this when I was writing the script. Shenault has 121 catches and 5 touchdowns in 2 seasons with the Jags. I seriously do not remember a single play he made. I would have taken the severe under on that catch number if given the opportunity. So I'm glad you didn't give me that opportunity, folks. But the stat that stands out to Jags fans were his 8 drops, which were second in the NFL a season ago, and it was looking like the Jags had a tough decision on whether to keep Shenault on their roster, given that the 2021 UDFA Tim Jones, who was kind of a big star for them this preseason, he's out of Southern Miss, by the way, he made a massive push to be on their final 53, and it looks like he will now. Meanwhile, the Panthers lack viable wide receiver depth, which makes Shenault at least somewhat intriguing. Though we wonder if using him as a hybrid running back wide receiver, kind of like Cordero Patterson, might be the best use of his services. He's off the fantasy radar, though Shenault landing in a new spot at least keeps the light flickering for his dynasty value. At our flex spot, we have an encouraging update on the Commanders' Brian Robinson. Robinson, Washington's 3rd-round pick this spring, was shot in the glute and lower leg in an attempted robbery on August 28th in Washington, D.C. Coach Ron Rivera, who visited Robinson in the hospital on Sunday with multiple other Commanders personnel, indicated Monday that doctors are optimistic regarding the recovery of Robinson. This is via John Keim of ESPN.com. And in an Instagram post on Monday, Robinson himself relayed that his surgery went well. Neither injury was life-threatening. All in all, this is as positive an outcome as we could possibly hope for on Robinson. He's going to be able to live his life above all, but the fact that he could soon resume his career is just a cherry on top. But literally, he's got a shot to play this year. Now, there is no timetable for Robinson's return, but the fact that we're already talking about a potential return is so incredible after the gut-wrenching news we got on Sunday night. I'm Joe Dolan, and this has been the Fantasy Points Daily Lineup. Remember to like this video, hit that thumbs up, and subscribe to the Fantasy Points channel for the Daily Lineup and all of our other videos. Wes Huber is going to have a show on Mondays, by the way, during the NFL season. That one is going to be a must check out. And if you haven't had your fantasy draft yet, Let us help. Go to fantasypoints.com for all your fantasy draft needs, with projections, cheat sheets, and articles updated constantly over the next week. And once the season starts, we'll help you make your roster as strong as possible with our industry-leading articles, tools, projections, everything, podcasts, videos, every form of media. We might get into watercolors as well. What's more, use code LINEUP22 for an extra 10% off any package. Good luck in your drafts tonight, and I'll see you tomorrow morning.